When factory worker Parker Grant started losing his vision at age 34, doctors couldn't explain it. Neither could the 17 other workers from Fletcher Chemical's Nevada plant who developed the same mysterious symptoms within 6 months. But Attorney Mike wasn't looking at a medical mystery, he was looking at corporate murder. Hidden in a locked filing cabinet, buried beneath years of safety reports, was a single internal memo dated 3 years before the first worker got sick. It proved everything. Fletcher Chemical's own scientists had warned executives that prolonged exposure to compound R47 would cause neurological damage, possibly permanent blindness. The executives responded by increasing production quotas and silencing the research team. This is the story of how 18 forgotten workers, one determined lawyer, and a piece of paper marked "Confidential, do not distribute" brought a billion-dollar company to its knees. This is Exhibit A. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The conference room was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Mike sat across from the interviewer, a folder thick with medical records resting on the table between them. His expression was measured, the kind that comes from years of hearing stories that would break most people. "Tell me about Parker Grant," the interviewer began. Mike leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped. Parker was 34 years old when I first met him. Married, 2 kids, worked the morning shift at Fletcher Chemical's Nevada processing plant for 11 years. He was the kind of guy who never missed a day, never complained. And then one morning in March 2019, he woke up and couldn't see out of his left eye. Just like that, just like that. One day he was fine, the next day half his vision was gone. His wife Callie drove him to the emergency room thinking maybe it was a stroke or a brain tumor. The doctors ran every test you can imagine. MRIs, CT scans, blood work, everything. They found nothing, no tumor, no blockage, no infection. His optic nerve was just dying and nobody could tell him why. The interviewer shifted in her seat. What did the doctors say? They said it was idiopathic. That's medical speak for we have no idea what's causing this. They sent him to 3 different specialists. Each one gave him the same answer: unexplained vision loss. They put him on steroids thinking maybe it was inflammation. It didn't help. Within 6 weeks, Parker lost vision in his right eye too. By May, he was legally blind. Mike pulled a photograph from the folder and slid it across the table. It showed a man in his 30s smiling at a backyard barbecue, his arm around a woman with kind eyes. That's Parker before, that was taken 2 months before he got sick. He coached his daughter's soccer team. He rebuilt classic cars on weekends. After he lost his vision, he couldn't drive, couldn't work, couldn't do any of the things that made him who he was. His wife had to quit her job to take care of him. They lost their house, and the whole time everyone kept telling them it was just bad luck, a medical mystery. But you didn't think it was bad luck, Mike's jaw tightened. No, because 3 weeks after Parker went blind, another worker from the same plant showed up at his doctor's office with the exact same symptoms. And then another, and then another. The interviewer's eyes widened. How many? By the end of summer 2019, we had documented 17 workers from Fletcher Chemical's Nevada plant with the same condition. Unexplained optic nerve degeneration, most of them going blind within weeks of the first symptoms. All of them worked in or around Building C, which is where they processed compound R47. What is compound R47? It's a chemical solvent Fletcher Chemical developed for industrial cleaning applications. Highly effective, incredibly profitable. Fletcher had patents on it, supplied it to manufacturers all over the country, and it was making them about $400 million a year. Mike pulled out another document, this one showing a chemical formula and structure diagram. The problem with R47 is that when it's heated during the manufacturing process, it releases vapor. The workers in Building C were breathing that vapor 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, some of them for years. And Fletcher Chemical didn't warn them. Fletcher Chemical told them it was perfectly safe. They said the ventilation systems were adequate, that the exposure levels were well within safety margins. They had all these official-looking safety reports, certifications, the whole 9 yards. When workers started getting sick, Fletcher's response was to offer them disability settlements, quiet payouts in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements. They were trying to make the problem go away before anyone noticed the pattern. The interviewer leaned forward, but someone did notice. Callie did, Parker's wife. She's not a scientist or a lawyer. She's an elementary school teacher, but she started doing what any desperate person would do. She went online and started searching for anyone else with the same symptoms. She found a support group for people with unexplained vision loss, and that's where she found them. Worker after worker, all from the same plant, all going blind for reasons doctors couldn't explain. Mike's voice grew quieter but more intense. Callie called me in October 2019. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said, they did this to him. They did this to all of them, and they're getting away with it. That's when I knew we had a case. What made you take it? Mike was silent for a moment, his eyes distant. I've spent 20 years fighting for people who can't fight for themselves, workers who get chewed up by companies that see them as expendable. Parker and those 17 other workers, they did everything right. They showed up, they worked hard, they trusted that their employer wouldn't poison them. And Fletcher Chemical took that trust and crushed it. So yes, I took the case because somebody had to. The interviewer nodded slowly. What was your first move? We filed a civil suit in December 2019 representing all 18 victims. Negligence, failure to warn, unsafe working conditions. Fletcher Chemical's lawyers responded exactly how I expected them to. They denied everything. They said the workers' conditions were unrelated to their employment. They claimed R47 was completely safe and that there was no scientific evidence linking it to vision loss. They buried us in motions trying to get the case dismissed. Did it work? Almost. We spent 6 months fighting just to keep the case alive. Fletcher had unlimited resources and a legal team that cost more per hour than most of my clients made in a month. But we had something they didn't have. We had the truth, and we had Parker and Callie who refused to give up. Mike pulled out another photograph. This one showed Parker sitting in a chair, his eyes unfocused and distant, his hand reaching out to touch his daughter's face as she leaned against him. That was taken a year after he went blind. His daughter was 9. She would describe things to him, colors and shapes and what people looked like. Parker told me once that the worst part wasn't losing his vision. It was knowing that 17 other people were going through the same thing, and Fletcher Chemical was acting like it never happened. The interviewer's voice was soft. How did you prove they were responsible? Mike looked up, and for the first time, something like satisfaction crossed his face. Discovery. In civil litigation, both sides have to share relevant documents. Fletcher tried to hide behind claims of trade secrets and proprietary information, but the judge wasn't having it. In August 2020, we got access to Fletcher's internal files, safety reports, email correspondence, meeting minutes, everything. My paralegal and I spent 3 months going through boxes and boxes of documents. What did you find? At first, nothing useful. Just routine stuff, safety protocols, production schedules. Fletcher had been very careful to keep everything looking normal. But then in November, we found something buried in their archived files that changed everything. The interviewer waited. Mike leaned back, his expression unreadable. We found out that Parker and those 17 workers weren't the first people to get sick from R47. They weren't even close. Quick pause. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The interviewer sat forward. What do you mean they weren't the first? Mike opened the folder and pulled out a document, yellowed at the edges, marked with a date from 2012. This is an incident report from Fletcher Chemical's pilot facility in Ohio. 7 years before Parker went blind, 3 workers at that facility reported vision problems, headaches, and dizziness after working with R47 during its testing phase. Fletcher's response was to shut down that facility, reassign the workers, and move production to Nevada. They knew, they suspected. And here's the thing about corporations like Fletcher. They don't act on suspicion, they act on certainty. So what did they do? They commissioned a study. Mike laid out another document, this one marked confidential internal use only. It was dated April 2013, authored by someone named Dr. Ashton Bishop. Dr. Bishop was a toxicologist Fletcher hired as a consultant. He ran a 6-month study on R47, specifically looking at neurological effects from vapor exposure. His findings were conclusive. Prolonged exposure to R47 vapor, particularly in poorly ventilated spaces, caused significant damage to the optic nerve and central nervous system. He recommended either reformulating the compound to reduce toxicity or implementing strict exposure limits with mandatory protective equipment. The interviewer stared at the document, and Fletcher ignored it? Worse, they buried it. Dr. Bishop submitted his report to Fletcher's Safety Compliance Department in October 2013. The response he got back was a polite thank you and a reminder that his findings were considered proprietary information protected under his consulting agreement. Translation: don't talk about this to anyone, ever. Did he comply? Mike's expression darkened. He didn't have a choice. Fletcher paid him a substantial consulting fee and had him sign an NDA with teeth. If he violated it, they could sue him for everything he had. So Dr. Bishop kept quiet and Fletcher kept producing R47. But they had proof it was dangerous. They had proof it was potentially dangerous. And that's the game corporations play. They'll spend years arguing about the word potentially while people get hurt. Fletcher's executives looked at Dr. Bishop's report and did a cost-benefit analysis. Reformulating R47 would cost them millions in research and development. Implementing strict safety protocols would slow down production and cut into profits. But doing nothing, that was free. At least until people started suing. The interviewer shook her head slowly. How did you find Dr. Bishop's report pure luck? It was misfiled in a section of Fletcher's archives labeled Vendor Assessments. My paralegal almost skipped over it because the file name was generic, but she opened it and there it was. Every warning Fletcher needed to protect their workers dated 6 years before Parker went blind. Mike pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. He stopped on one and showed it to the interviewer. It was a page from the report highlighted in yellow. The text read, recommendation, immediate implementation of enhanced ventilation systems and mandatory use of respiratory protection for all personnel working within 50 feet of R47 processing equipment. Failure to implement these measures will likely result in serious and irreversible neurological harm to exposed individuals. Likely result in serious and irreversible neurological harm. The interviewer read aloud. They knew exactly what would happen. Yes, and here's what makes it even worse. After they buried Dr. Bishop's report, Fletcher actually increased production of R47. In 2015, they expanded the Nevada facility and added a second processing line in Building C. More workers, more exposure, more profit. And not one of those workers was told that the compound they were handling could blind them. What about OSHA, workplace safety regulations? Mike's laugh was bitter. Fletcher submitted all the right paperwork to OSHA. They claimed their ventilation systems met industry standards. They provided safety data sheets that listed R47 as an irritant but didn't mention the neurological risk. On paper, everything looked fine. OSHA doesn't have the resources to independently test every chemical compound, so they rely on manufacturers, to be honest. Fletcher took advantage of that. The interviewer was quiet for a moment. When did you find out about the other victims? January 2021. Once we had Dr. Bishop's report, I knew we needed to dig deeper. I hired an investigator to track down anyone else who might have gotten sick from R47. What we found was staggering. Mike pulled out a map of the United States with red dots marked in several locations. The Ohio pilot facility in 2012, 3 workers with vision problems. A contract manufacturing site in Georgia in 2014, 2 workers. A distribution warehouse in Texas in 2017, 4 workers who handled concentrated R47 and developed the same symptoms. Fletcher settled with every single one of them quietly, always with NDAs, always making it go away before anyone could connect the dots. How many people in total? By the time we finished investigating, we documented 27 victims across 4 states over 8 years. 27 people who lost their vision or suffered permanent neurological damage because Fletcher Chemical chose profit over safety. The interviewer's voice was barely above a whisper. And they all signed NDAs, most of them. But here's the thing about NDAs. They can't protect you from criminal liability. And once we had Dr. Bishop's report and evidence of a pattern going back years. This wasn't just a civil case anymore. This was fraud. This was reckless endangerment. This was a company that knowingly poisoned its workers and then paid them to keep quiet about it. Mike stood and walked to the window, his back to the interviewer. In March 2021, I reached out to the Nevada Attorney General's office. I gave them everything we had. Dr. Bishop's report, the incident reports from other facilities, the settlement agreements, all of it. They opened a criminal investigation into Fletcher Chemical. How did Fletcher respond? Mike turned back, and his expression was grim. They went into full crisis mode. They hired one of the biggest law firms in the country. They started a PR campaign claiming they were being targeted by opportunistic lawyers and disgruntled former employees. They issued statements saying they had always prioritized worker safety and that any allegations otherwise were baseless. Their stock barely moved. They were so confident they could make this go away. Could they? They almost did. See, we had Dr. Bishop's report proving they knew R47 was dangerous. We had incident reports showing a pattern of injuries. We had victim testimony. But what we didn't have was direct evidence that Fletcher's executives made a conscious decision to ignore the warnings and keep producing R47 anyway. That's what we needed to prove criminal negligence. The interviewer leaned forward. Did you find it? Mike sat back down, and for the first time since the interview began, he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just checkmated an opponent who thought they were untouchable. May 2021, we were in the final stages of discovery. Fletcher's lawyers were fighting us on every single document request, claiming everything was privileged or proprietary. But there was one category of documents they couldn't hide behind legal protection. Internal emails. The judge ordered Fletcher to produce all email correspondence between executives regarding R47 safety concerns from 2013 to 2020. And buried in about 10,000 pages of boring corporate communications, we found it. An email chain from November 2016. Subject line, R47 safety assessment follow-up. It was between Fletcher's CEO, Reggie Bishop, their chief operating officer, and their head of legal. They were discussing Dr. Bishop's report from 2013 and whether they needed to revisit his recommendations. Mike pulled out a printed email and slid it across the table. The interviewer picked it up and read aloud. We've reviewed the 2013 toxicology assessment again in light of recent inquiries. The recommendations remain cost prohibitive and would significantly impact production timelines. Given that we've had minimal incidents to date and all have been resolved through settlement, I recommend we maintain current protocols. The risk exposure is manageable, the interviewer looked up. Risk exposure is manageable. Risk exposure, Mike repeated, not risk to workers. Risk exposure to the company. They knew. They had the report sitting right there telling them people would get hurt, and they decided it was cheaper to pay off victims than to fix the problem. Who wrote that email? Mike's voice was cold. Reggie Bishop, Fletcher Chemical CEO. The same man who went on television 6 months later and said his company had no knowledge of any health risks associated with R47. The interviewer set down the email. So you had him. We had them all. But here's what really made it stick. That email wasn't the only one. Once we had the first one, we found more. A whole chain of internal communications showing that Fletcher's leadership knew about the risks, knew about the injuries, and actively chose to hide the information and keep production running. Mike pulled out another document and his voice dropped. And then in July 2021, we found something even bigger, something that proved this wasn't just negligence. This was a cover-up. The interviewer waited, tension thick in the air. Mike looked up, his eyes hard. We found the memo. The interviewer leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. The memo, what was in it? Mike reached into his folder and pulled out a document sealed in a plastic protective sleeve. The paper inside was crisp and white, marked with a red stamp in the corner that read, Confidential Executive Level Only. The date showed the 15th of March, 2016. This is a photocopy The original's locked in evidence right now, but I've read this thing so many times I could recite it from memory. He slid it across the table. The interviewer picked it up carefully, her eyes scanning the page. The subject line read, "Recommendation to discontinue R47 production pending safety review." It's from Dr. Ashton Bishop, the toxicologist Fletcher, hired back in 2013. Turns out he didn't just disappear after they buried his first report. He kept monitoring the situation. And in early 2016, when he heard about the workers at the Georgia facility getting sick, he wrote this memo directly to the executive board. The interviewer's voice was quiet as she read sections aloud. Based on incident reports from Ohio and Georgia facilities, my 2013 findings regarding neurological toxicity of R47 vapor have been confirmed through real-world exposure cases. I am formally recommending immediate cessation of R47 production until comprehensive safety protocols can be implemented and existing formulation can be modified to reduce toxic exposure risk. She looked up. He told them to stop production. He didn't just tell them, he begged them. Look at the next paragraph. The interviewer continued reading, partmade.com so, the current trajectory suggests we will see an exponential increase in exposure-related injuries as production scales. Workers in high-exposure environments are at severe risk of permanent disability. The company faces significant legal and ethical liability if we continue operations without addressing these documented hazards. I cannot, in good conscience, remain silent while preventable harm occurs. Preventable harm, Mike repeated. Dr. Bishop laid it out in black and white. Stop making this poison or people will go blind. And you know what Fletcher's response was? The interviewer shook her head. Mike pulled out another document, this one an email dated the 22nd of March 2016, 1 week after Dr. Bishop's memo. This is from Fletcher's chief operating officer to the CEO and board members. Quote, Dr. Bishop's concerns are noted but appear to be based on isolated incidents rather than systemic risk. Recommend we continue current operations while conducting an internal review. We should also consider whether Dr. Bishop's continued consulting relationship serves the company's interest. They threatened his job. They did more than threaten it. 2 months later, Fletcher terminated Dr. Bishop's consulting contract. They paid him the remainder of his agreement and reminded him again that everything he knew was covered under his NDA. They silenced the one expert who was trying to protect their workers. The interviewer set down the memo, her face pale. And then what happened? Then Fletcher kept producing R47 for another 3 years. They expanded operations. They hired more workers. And those workers had no idea they were being exposed to a chemical that their own expert had warned would cause permanent disability. Mike's voice grew harder. Parker Grant started working in Building C in January 2017. That's 10 months after Dr. Bishop sent that memo. If Fletcher had listened to him, if they had stopped production or even just implemented proper safety equipment, Parker would still have his vision. His kids would still have their father the way he was. But Fletcher chose profit over people, and Parker paid the price. Did Dr. Bishop ever testify? We tried to contact him in early 2021 after we found his original report. It took us months to track him down. He'd left the consulting world entirely, moved to Vermont, started teaching at a small college. When my investigator finally reached him, his first response was, I've been waiting for someone to ask me about this. He wanted to talk. He needed to talk, doctor. Bishop had been carrying this guilt for years. He knew people were getting hurt, knew he'd warned Fletcher, and knew they'd buried his warnings. The NDA kept him quiet, but the moment we showed him that we had his memo through legal discovery, he agreed to cooperate fully. He was our star witness. Mike pulled up a video on his tablet and turned it toward the interviewer. It showed Dr. Bishop, a man in his early 60s with gray hair and tired eyes, sitting in a deposition room. The video played. I told them exactly what would happen. I gave them specific recommendations that would have prevented these injuries, and they looked at the cost of implementation versus the cost of potential settlements and made a business decision. They decided it was cheaper to let people go blind and pay them off than to fix the problem. That's not negligence. That's calculated harm. Mike stopped the video. His testimony was devastating. But what really sealed Fletcher's fate was how the victims responded when they found out about the memo. What do you mean? Remember, most of these workers had no idea why they got sick. They'd been told it was bad luck, unexplained medical conditions, anything but the truth. When we showed them Dr. Bishop's memo, when they realized that Fletcher had known for years that R47 was dangerous and kept it secret, something changed. Mike pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. He stopped on one showing a press conference, a group of people standing together, some with white canes, others guided by family members. Parker Grant stood in the center, his wife Callie beside him. June 2021. We held a press conference outside the Nevada Federal Courthouse. 18 victims all together for the first time. Parker spoke on behalf of all of them. He pulled up another video. Parker's face filled the screen, his eyes unfocused but his voice strong. Fletcher Chemical stole my vision and my future. But what hurts more is knowing they did it on purpose. They had a scientist telling them this would happen, and they chose money over my life, over all our lives. We're not asking for sympathy, we're demanding justice. The interviewer wiped her eyes. How did Fletcher respond? With more denial. They issued a statement saying the memo was taken out of context, that Dr. Bishop was overly cautious, that his recommendations were based on worst-case scenarios that never materialized. They claimed they had conducted their own internal safety reviews that found R47 to be safe when used properly. Even with all the evidence, even with everything, their lawyers argued that correlation wasn't causation, that the workers' conditions could have been caused by any number of factors, that there was no definitive proof R47 was responsible. They were going to fight this to the end. Could they win? Mike was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. They might have. See, corporate law is complicated. Even with Dr. Bishop's memo and the email chains, Fletcher could argue they relied on other experts, that they acted in good faith based on the information available. It would come down to a jury deciding whether Fletcher's actions crossed the line from negligence to criminal recklessness. And juries are unpredictable. So what changed? Mike looked up and there was something fierce in his eyes. What changed was that someone inside Fletcher got scared. Someone who realized that this wasn't going to go away, that the walls were closing in and that they didn't want to go down with the ship. The interviewer's breath caught. A whistleblower. A whistleblower with access to everything. Someone who knew where all the bodies were buried. And in September 2021, they came to us with information that proved this cover-up went far beyond what we'd imagined. Who was it? Mike's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Fletcher Chemical's former general counsel, and what she brought us showed that the memo we found wasn't the smoking gun, it was just the beginning. Her name was Valerie Kim. She'd been Fletcher Chemical's general counsel for 8 years, trusted advisor to the CEO, present in every major decision. And in September 2021, she walked into my office with 3 bankers' boxes full of documents. The interviewer's eyes widened. Why did she come forward? She said she couldn't sleep anymore, that every time she closed her eyes, she saw Parker Grant's face on the news, heard him talk about his daughters. She had kids too, and she realized she'd been part of something that destroyed families. Mike pulled out a legal pad covered in handwritten notes. Valerie told us everything. The memo from Dr. Bishop wasn't just ignored. It triggered a full executive strategy session on how to manage what they called the R47 liability issue. They didn't discuss fixing the problem. They discussed containing it. What does that mean? It means Fletcher created a dedicated legal fund specifically for settling R47 injury claims quietly. They projected they'd have between 2 to 5 claims per year based on Dr. Bishop's warnings. They budgeted for it. They literally set aside money to pay off the people they knew would get hurt. The interviewer's voice was hollow. They planned for it. They planned for it. And Valerie brought us the internal budget documents proving it. Line item expenses labeled Product Liability Reserve R47. $15 million allocated over 5 years. They knew exactly what they were doing. Mike's voice grew quieter but more intense. But here's where it gets worse. Valerie also brought us communications showing that Fletcher had lobbied state regulators to weaken workplace safety reporting requirements. They'd made political donations to lawmakers who could influence OSHA oversight. They'd even funded an industry study that concluded R47 was safe, buying the results they needed. How high did it go? All the way to the top. CEO Reggie Bishop wasn't just aware of the cover-up, he orchestrated it. But Valerie gave us something that proved he wasn't working alone. The interviewer leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Mike pulled out one final document and his expression turned grim. Fletcher Chemical was acquired by a larger conglomerate in 2014, and the parent company knew everything. Titan Corp Industries, a $50 billion multinational with divisions in chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and manufacturing. When they acquired Fletcher in 2014, they conducted due diligence. Valerie showed us the acquisition documents. Titan Corp's legal team had reviewed Dr. Bishop's 2013 report as part of their assessment. The interviewer's voice was barely audible. They knew before they bought the company. They knew and they bought it anyway. Because R47 was profitable, Titan Corp's executives saw the liability risk and decided it was acceptable. They approved Fletcher's containment strategy. They signed off on the legal reserve fund. They became partners in the cover-up. Mike leaned back, exhaustion evident on his face. October 2021, we filed an amended lawsuit adding Titan Corp as a defendant. The Nevada Attorney General expanded the criminal investigation, and the story finally broke nationally. Major news outlets picked it up. Congressional representatives started asking questions. Fletcher and Titan Corp couldn't hide anymore. What happened to them? In March 2022, both companies agreed to a settlement. $250 million divided among all 27 victims. Fletcher discontinued R47 production permanently. Titan Corp agreed to independent safety audits of all their chemical facilities. And both companies admitted no wrongdoing. The interviewer's face fell. They didn't admit guilt. That's how these things work. They paid the money to make it go away. Reggie Bishop retired with a full pension. No one went to jail. The criminal investigation stalled because proving criminal intent beyond reasonable doubt is nearly impossible when corporations hide behind layers of plausible deniability. Mike's voice grew firm. But here's what they couldn't buy. Parker Grant got his settlement. So did every other victim. And more importantly, the memo is public record now. Dr. Bishop's warnings are public. Valerie Kim's testimony is public. Anyone researching corporate negligence, anyone fighting similar battles can see exactly how Fletcher Chemical chose profit over human lives. Is that justice? Mike was quiet for a long moment. It's not the justice I wanted, but it's something. Parker can't see his kids grow up, but he can afford the care he needs. Those 18 workers have financial security. And maybe, just maybe, the next company thinking about cutting corners will remember what happened to Fletcher and think twice. The interviewer nodded slowly. What's next for you? There are more cases, more workers, more companies, more fights, because this isn't over. Fletcher Chemical isn't unique. There are dozens of corporations right now making the same calculations, weighing profit against safety, gambling with people's lives. My job is to make sure they lose that bet. Mike stood and gathered his documents. Exhibit A proved they knew. Now everyone else knows too. And that's how we start changing things, one case at a time, one memo at a time, one voice for the voiceless at a time. The screen faded to black, leaving only one final line of text. R47 was banned federally in 2023. The fight continues. Up next, two more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoy this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.